Hello and welcome to another podcast from Fantasy Football Scout. We are back with episode 3 of Life Without FPL, and I'm joined again by David and Neale. How you doing, guys?
Yeah, very good. Thanks, Andy. More of the same for me and my family last few weeks. Now the Easter holidays are over, we now feel more guilty about how bad our homeschooling is, but that's about the only change so far.
Yeah, I must admit, when we talked about lockdown like 2 weeks ago on the first episode, I kind of said that the kind of homeschooling thing was fine, but that's really because I was in the first part of Easter break. So we're now back to it now, and I realise it's actually an absolute nightmare, and it's killing me every morning having to go through maths homework. But it is what it is. We get through it. We have to do it at the moment. And how about you, Neale? How are you getting on?
Good, yeah. Very little to report. I'm looking forward to this weekend's trip to Aldi. That's become a treat now for me. Getting out once every 2 weeks and doing the family shop. So yeah, can't wait for that.
Aldi away.
Yeah.
It's Tesco for me every weekend. 7 a.m. I go just to really dodge the crowds. So either Saturday or Sunday I go at 7 a.m. So that'll be my excitement this weekend. But for this episode, so we're doing something a bit different every single week. So last week I spoke to Chris, and he talked about Fantasy Football Scout, a bit of the history behind it, and looking towards the future. And today we're going to do a bit of reminiscing. Hence, if you're watching on video, you'll see the picture of David Beckham on screen. So we're going to talk more about just general football, a little bit at the end about how we got into FPL, but most of this will revolve around football. So some of our earliest football memories, kind of anything that kind of made us fall in love with the game, any players that maybe did the same thing, and then some of this will tie together and kind of be similar, but favourite moments that we've seen, and potentially the best goal that we've ever seen live. So we'll kick it off with kind of earliest memories of football. And the reason I brought this up is because I discussed this with someone the other day, and I think genuine earliest memories, like for me, I really don't actually have that many, because a lot of the stuff I remember now is more from clips. Like you think you remember it from the time, but actually you're just remembering a clip you saw on YouTube or the game, that's maybe been shown since on TV. So yeah, kind of looking for earliest football memories, and what made you get into football. So we'll start with Neale. How did you get into it?
I'm going to echo what you just said there, because a lot of what I think are my memories, I've probably just supplemented through the years with clips of the Premier League years and FA Cup final packages and things like that. I think the first match that I can really remember is the 89 FA Cup final, which dates me horribly, unfortunately. I think I was around 5 then, and I can remember that because it was a 5-goal thriller. I can remember sort of bits of it. And then Italia 90 was sort of my first real World Cup. Again, I can't really remember it in its entirety. Apparently, it was a really dire watch, like in terms of the quality of football, because of course you could pass back the keeper then and pick it up. But you just sort of remember the filleted highlights from your sort of your goal halcyon era of childhood football fandom. Again, embellished by rewatches of like Gaza in the semi-final through the year. So yeah, those are sort of the main stand-up memories. The first ever match I went to, at least the first Newcastle match I went to, was an absolute stinker. It was 0-0 against Bristol City in what would have been the second division at the time, which is now the Championship. And it was absolutely terrible. I've seen sort of present-day Newcastle fans complaining about some of the players we've got at our disposal, and some of the sort of in the nadir of the mid-noughties. But I tell you now, like some of the players we had back then and under our dealers, Wayne Faraday, Kevin Brock, people like that, players who haven't even got their own Wikipedia page.
That must be bad.
Yeah.
I must say I've never heard of these players you're talking about right now. And one thing this is going to show us, I think, this podcast is probably give away our age a bit, I'd say, from the kind of first memories. But yeah, no Wikipedia page. That's harsh.
Yeah, so it was. I remember bits of it. I remember being totally bored by the whole spectacle, but kind of engrossed in my surroundings. So like fellow supporters around me, the way the stadium looked and smelt. This was before the days of gentrification. Everything was standing, as far as I can remember. Anyway, don't want to sound like Tony Blair here, trying to recall watching Jackie Milburn, but there was no roof on the stand. I was in the Gallagher end, sort of brutalist concrete structures around the ground. I think I'm right in saying there was no roof on the toilets either at the time. So this was before the old seater behemoth that you see now in Newcastle city centre. So I remember going with my dad to the match and being sort of bored by the game, but then hooked by the experience of going to a match. And then I think my love of Newcastle was I wouldn't say bored out then, because I was already hooked on Newcastle. I was already listening to the games on the radio. It was kind of forced upon me, really. It's kind of a tradition passed down through the generations of the Rigg family that you have to like football. So it was thrust into it from such a young age. But yeah, that was the first game I went to, and then from then on, that was basically all there was in my life for the next sort of 10 years after that, before you discover things like music and TV and stuff like that. So that's my first abiding memory of football anyway.
And what was kind of like, was there any like, probably not that long ago, but maybe a few years later or whatever, like any players or anything that kind of, I guess like kept the interest essentially? Like you have to obviously keep watching it. You'd hope that maybe there was some players that kind of, you locked onto at an early age that like kind of made you like keep the love for football, I suppose.
Yeah, I was kind of lucky in a sense that Newcastle were on an upward trajectory from such a young age when I was supporting them. I did have a couple of years when they were treading water in the second tier of English football, but from sort of 92 onwards, they were on an upward curve under Keegan. So it was great fun watching it as well in my formative years. So yeah, plenty of names that everyone will recognise. I think for some reason when I was a toddler, I had a sort of affinity for Glenn Roeder, who later became manager of us. But I don't know why I latched onto him. But yeah, so Steve Watson was kind of my first hero, I guess. I think for obvious reasons, local lad playing for his boyhood club, and obviously he was ginger as well, so I identified with that. I did like his somersault throws that he used to do. So yeah, there was obviously names you could reel off any amount of them: Beardsley, Rob Lee, Ginola, Gillespie, like that. Asprey from the 90s, Ferdinand Shearer, obviously. So my interest was kept healthy from 92 to 97, and then the downward spiral happened after that, with a couple of decent years in between, some good years under Robson, and it one good season under Pardew. But how I long for those days again. Maybe I'll get them with the millions of pounds are going to get invested in by the Saudi regime. Not that I'm overly happy with that, but yeah, this time next year could be.
It's going to be Mbappe, isn't it? Mbappe on the right, yeah, Kane in the middle,
Van Dijk at the back, Alexander Arnold whipping them in for sorry?
For Joe Linton, yeah?
For Joe Linton, yeah. I was trying to think of the worst Newcastle player possible, and you've hit the nail on the head there.
That'd be it. Because to be fair, like it took without going off too much of a tangent, it took Man City a long time to get a core squad or a squad of excellent players. So yeah, could have Joe Linton flanked by Neymar and Mbappe maybe. I mean, that would be pretty funny to see. And how about you, David? Kind of what's your obviously like genuine earliest memory where you can, generally remember watching a game or being at a game, stuff like that?
Yeah, I mean, I'd sort of similar to what you guys already mentioned, in that I know what the earliest matches were that I was watching, but I know more about them in the later years, having kind of gone back and had a look. So I'm pretty sure the earliest match that I remember watching was England versus Argentina '98 World Cup. Obviously, the famous Beckham sending off game. So yeah, if we're talking about showing age, Neil's talking about the 80s, and my earliest memory is late 90s. So yeah, I'm a young guy, but I don't really remember the game. I just remember my house being full of just like every member of extended family I could possibly imagine. And obviously at the time, so I was within 5 or 6 at the time. That was really strange, and everybody kind of like excited and then angry for obvious reason. I remember that more than I remember the game. So I have no memory of Owen's incredible goal. I have no memory of the sending off, but I remember the emotion of it. And then I think the one that had the biggest impact on me was probably the 1999 Champions League final. I mean, I wasn't really a Man United fan, but I was 5 or 6, and my dad just had a neutral's interest. He was a West Ham fan, and it's just, again, it's an incredible narrative. I don't actually remember what happened. I just remember the emotion of it and the fact that it was a spectacle. So then I kind of watched Man United quite a lot when I was that sort of age. But the first game that I went to was a Reading game, because that's where I grew up. And I'm sorry, Neil, it sounds like you had a bit of a dire time on your first game. My first game we absolutely destroyed Luton 4-1. Jamie Curran scored a hat trick. I got to see a hat trick and a thrashing in my first game, which is great. And unfortunately, I never got to go to Elm Road. The way you've described Newcastle's stadium back in the day, man, Reading's old stadium, Elm Road, was absolutely dreadful. And someone I used to work with at the Herald, who's just the Plymouth Herald, has just kind of been to every stadium going because he's been in Football League coverage for about 20 years. And he said, I don't like to deal in absolutes, but comfortably the worst stadium I've ever been to in my entire career was Elm Road. And it's crazy because Elm Road was really close to where we ended up moving. So we ended up moving to Elm Road when I was about 7, but it was after we'd moved to Majeski. So I could have been on the same road as the stadium, but apparently that would have been a nightmare for traffic, according to my parents. So maybe it's for the best. But the Majeski is a lovely stadium, always has been. So I unfortunately don't really have any horrible stadium stories either. I came in after the gentrification, as you mentioned there. Like football was on its way to globalization when I first got into it. And speaking of globalization, to be honest, most of my early memories outside of a couple of Reading games was mostly what I saw on television, which was World Cup. So I've always been someone who's really enjoyed international football more than I've enjoyed club football, which probably makes me the bad guy somehow, because I know that a lot of people find international football really boring. But if I was to say which team I had the biggest allegiance to, like international and club, obviously I love Reading as my local team, but because they've never really had too much interaction with the national team, for the national team to be seen as the bad guy to us, England is my team. That's the team that I care most about. So then a couple of other early football memories. I mean, I think the first games I actually remember watching in detail was probably Euro 2000. And again, I mean, obviously there was a lot of emotion involved. So I remember the disappointment of losing to Romania 3-2, I think it was.
Did Phil Neville get sent off? Was it
yes,
that the game?
Yeah.
Oh, that was such a bad
I remember
tackle.
that very clearly. And my dad's anger, oh man, have never seen him so angry. That was my first inkling of when I started to understand what it was to con the ref, because there was one point where I think it was Petrescu was sharing a joke with the referee, and I, in my young mind, was like, "Oh, that's a bit strange. Why is he having a joke with the referee?" And my dad was like, "Oh, it's because they're best mates. It's because they're best mates. They are." So I spent most of my early formative years thinking that Dan Petrescu was really good friends with the referee. And then I remember the Portugal game as well. There was disappointment, but it was good because, if you're going to be an England fan from an early stage, you've got to get used to the disappointment. And so then Euro 2000 out of the way, World Cup 2002 was when I was old enough to be obsessed, because I was 9 or 10. And that's when I started designing my own wall charts, going through every World Cup magazine you could get, and doing little magazines of my own, profiling all the players. I probably know more about World Cup 2002 than anything else. I've had to do a specialism subject on Mastermind World Cup 2002, because it was just perfectly timed for me to know absolutely everything. Because at that age, you have nothing else to worry about. You can spend all of your time just collecting the stickers, collecting the little bobbleheads or what have you. And then from there onwards, it all became about the Premier League, because you watch the World Cup at 9 or 10 and you want to watch football all the time. It was the Premier League. And as I said, it's a shame that I didn't get to see so many Reading games during this period, because my dad was a West Ham fan and he couldn't really get to Upton Park too often, and worked a few Saturdays and what have you. So I didn't get that very early age football experience until I was a little bit older. But it coincided quite nicely with some fantastic success for Reading. So I think I was about 14, 15 when we won the championship with record points tally, which, by the way, still stands today, 106 points. And fantastically, we managed to stop Wolves doing it a couple of years ago by beating them, even though we had nothing to play for. So that season was just incredible, because we just ran away with it. I mean, we had a nice sort of feisty kind of relationship with Sheffield United under Neil Warnock, because most people have a feisty relationship with Neil Warnock. So there was an added edge to it. It was just a fantastic season, completely unprecedented level of success. We'd never been in the top flight at all. And then the most amazing thing was that we then went up to the Premier League the following year. So my two worlds collided. I've been watching so much Premier League football, mostly leaning towards Man United just because of the Champions League success I'd seen in the 90s. But seeing those two come together was incredible. And then the best thing was that we competed to begin with. We came up with a squad. We didn't really change it too much. We played a simple 4-4-2 that Mike Bassett would have been proud of. Dave Kitson and Kevin Doyle up front with Steve Sidworth. We're talking about fellow Gingers. Steve Sidwell, what a hero. Absolute engine room for that team. And like I said, we didn't change too much about it. And we finished 8th, I think it was, in the first season. We nearly made it into Europe. And we just fitted in straight at that level. And I saw a lot of games that year. And it's always great when combining going to football sort of like quite a lot for the first time combines with success. Obviously, it's harder to follow it through the worst times. And again, similar trajectory to Newcastle in one sense, in that once we had those few years, we sticky patch second season. Everybody remembers Fulham's great escape, but most people don't remember that was at our expense. The year that they stayed up under Hodgson, it's because we just basically let it slide. I mean, there was a game, I think, when we lost 7-4 to Portsmouth. We then lost at Fulham as well. It just completely went all downhill, basically because Sidwell left, which was just, we never replaced him. That was frustrating. Went to go and be a Chelsea number 9. It's just madness. And then really since then, it's just been kind of mediocrity. We've had another Premier League campaign, but it wasn't the same as before. I was at the playoff final when we drew 0-0 at Huddersfield and then lost on penalties. It's kind of, that's where it's gone. But, in that time, I moved into working in football. And, I've got plenty of other, things to kind of latch onto to enjoy outside of Reading, because most Reading fans now will know that if we can just finish 18th in the Championship, I'll take it. We'll just take it. And it just doesn't really make for too much enjoyment. So, as I said, thankfully, I've been able to enjoy watching teams like Plymouth Argyle for work, and then, of course, covering FPL, sort of following in very intricate detail top-level teams as well. So thank you to those other clubs who've helped me enjoy football in the last few years when Reading haven't been so entertaining.
You never know. Maybe they'll get back into the Premier League at some point. It just could be a few. Maybe you need a Saudi owner like Newcastle. I'll get them up the tables pretty quick. Like for me, it's kind of a similar story. I'm actually probably, in terms of most of my memories, to be honest, are England as well. And I think the reason for that is, when I supported Man United. Like I'm, from the southwest. I'm a typical Man United fan. I'm not from Manchester. I kind of got it drummed into me. Funnily enough, I got it drummed into me by an uncle that doesn't even like football anymore. He's kind of down the line of there's too much money in the game, etc. So he's completely off football now. He likes rugby, but he kind of knocked it into me. And it was him and my granddad, which would have been his dad, who kind of got me into football. They were kind of like, my granddad especially was like a Bristol Rovers fan. So I grew up near there. I was born in Bristol as well. Because Man United was just, and to be honest, I'll be honest, I'm sure at that age, like you said, they're doing so well, it's kind of hard not to love them at the same time. When you're a kid, you don't really think about, who's your local team and stuff like that. But my first game was Bristol Rovers. But I do not remember. I know it's at Twerton Park. I know it was Boxing Day. I don't know what the result was. It absolutely chucked it down from start to finish. I was stood up, no stand. I think there was a cover on one of the stands, but it was not the one I was stood in.
Bristol Rovers stadiums.
It was Twerton Park.
Not a nice history.
Twerton Park it was. I was right behind the goal. I was just worried I was going to get smacked by the ball. And it just chucked it down the whole time. But I did get a burger, so I was pretty happy about that. But that was my first game. But yeah, earliest memories, like I remember the 94 FA Cup final where we beat Chelsea. I think it was 4-0. But I don't remember any of the game. I kind of got more memories of what was happening around. So I know I was watching it in my kitchen. I know my friend was around, but we barely watched the game. We were just playing football in the garden. We just kept coming in to see what the result was. And then after that, I genuinely don't think I can remember at Man United another memory until the 99 final. Those 5 years in between, I know Beckham scored the goal against Wimbledon, but I'm pretty sure I wasn't watching that live. I've just seen it a million times since. And I do remember England for it. I come back to that. The reason I think I remember England more is because obviously if you support Man United, especially at that age, you're probably only going to watch it with people if they also support Man United. Whereas for England, everybody is supporting England. There's some people. Yeah, there's some people that obviously just don't like international football, and that's fair enough. But my mates would always watch England together, even if we weren't literally sat in the same room. Like we'd run out into the street and talk about it when there was a goal. So when Owen scored 98 against Argentina, we legged out into the street to celebrate, and then we both went back to our separate houses to carry on watching it. A bit later on, there was Beckham versus Greece. Same thing happened when he scored. I think it was 2001 in the last minute. And I remember the 96 Euros when Gascoigne scored against Scotland. I remember watching that. There was the 4-0 against Holland as well. So I definitely remember England more than Man United at that age at least. But the player that kind of outside of England that really kind of kept my interest outside of that was Ryan Giggs, which is I guess it's quite cliche from that time when I started watching them, but I think he was just kind of like when you're younger, you don't care about the defensive midfielder that's breaking up play. You don't care about the centre backs that have got good defensive positioning and are winning the ball back. You want those kind of skillful players, and Ryan Giggs was kind of it, like a proper out and out winger. And funnily enough, before I remembered, I had a VHS again showing my age, and it was Ryan Giggs' Secrets and Skills. And just before we came on, I went on YouTube to see if there was any clips, and there was, and it is so much worse than I remember. And I would urge anyone who's listening to this to go and Google or go on YouTube and watch some of those clips because they're hilarious. It's not just skills; it's also got him talking about his life. So at one point he gets asked about TV, and he says, "Yeah, I watch the Australian soaps like Neighbours." So that's what he watches when he was there. He gets asked about clothes, and he says, "I can buy." He basically says, "I've got the money to go and buy a suit when I want. My friends have to save up." I'm just thinking now, when he's older, it's not as bad as it sounds, but that is essentially what he says. Wow. But he was very young. I'd say a few years later, he's probably been media trained to not say that kind of thing.
I remember Ferguson shielded him, didn't he, from interviews for like the first few years of his career. So he probably didn't get that. It's drilled into them now, isn't it, from such a young age that these are the stock answers that you have to give.
Yeah, they're kind of like I understand. Like we all as fans want them to say their piece and give their thoughts, but I can see why. There's so much money in the game now. You don't want to say the wrong thing. Social media, you just get cancelled and whatever.
Especially
but
now,
he did kind of say that, like, I can go and buy a suit, so that's what I do with my money. And then he said, but I don't buy suits every day. I was like, well, yeah, why would you buy suits every day? But I would urge people to go and watch that. But Ryan Giggs definitely kind of kept my hold. And I think the other reason why I love football, and I think it's the same for like every kid that plays, it's so accessible. Like, all you need is a ball. Like, literally just a ball and then you're done. You can find anything for goalposts. I've used bikes, jumpers, school bags, like anything that's kind of out and about. And I see that with my son now. Like, he's just turned 11 and he loves football. Like, he loves going to play it. He plays for a team. But he's not really that bothered about watching it still. He's not at that age where he wants to sit down every week and watch. If I'm watching it and he's not doing anything else, he'll come and watch it with me. But he's not watching it week in, week out. Ireland, I mean, I guess when I was growing up, England were pretty good, whereas Ireland maybe not so good where he is now. I won't go too much into that because I get slaughtered by everyone. But I don't know. I mean, he watched the World Cup when England were doing well with me and stuff. So yeah, it's interesting. I think that's what, when I was young, I think that really helped, that you just need a ball, you can go to the park, you can go and play in the street, and that's kind of how
then when everyone else has that, and then you have the camaraderie around it as well. Like that's the key. I like what you're saying about England. I think the one for me was the 5-1 against Germany, where again it was just one of those moments where it was different because literally like everyone was in my house. Like my house was one of the ones that would host the whole street pretty much for big games. And honestly, I've never seen my dad fall over so many times in that. We're scoring 5 goals. No alcohol involved, but it was as if he was drunk because he was drunk on the emotion of it, and so was everyone else. So yeah, England's such a big part of.
We never beat Germany as well. Like I actually
exactly, yeah.
I have a slightly different thing because in my house, like my mum would call herself a Bristol City fan, but she never really watched the games and stuff. And my dad, like, you would not find someone less interested in sport than my dad. Like when I used to play as a kid, like he would come, like he supported me, would come and watch every single game. He learnt the offside rule. He once. One of the linesmen was ill or something and couldn't come to the game, and he ran the line. He pulled a hamstring after about 20 minutes because he's not very sporty at all. But I was watching the 99 Champions League final, and I remember celebrating. I don't remember the goals going in. I don't remember the match, but I remember celebrating like massively. Got out of my chair, and he told me to be quiet. Like, he told me to keep the noise down. Like, that's how much my dad's into it. And I went and told my mum. I think she was in the kitchen or she was out the back feeding rabbits or something like that. And she was just not really interested. Oh, that's great. So I had a kind of different thing. I didn't really have the immediate family, at least, that likes sport. But I think it's just, like I said, you just need a ball. You go out in the street and, you can get like 20 mates together. All you need is that one ball. And you're kind of sorted from there.
It was the opposite for my dad because it's a great bonding thing for me and him because we really, really love football. Perhaps less than we did back when we were younger. As you get older, you kind of lose a little bit of the raw emotion. But I remember watching again, you might be too young for this. He beat Barcelona in '97. Masbria scored a hat-trick in the Champions League. And we went 3-0 up. And gradually, Barca kept getting back in the game. They got 1 goal back, then they got a second goal back, and there was still quite a bit of the game to play. And I remember seeing my dad so worked up that he had to leave the room and go and have a lie down, and he couldn't watch the end of the game because he was just so stressed. I remember thinking at the time, that's an extreme reaction, and then discovering that that's actually quite a normal reaction. And then over the years, convincing myself I'm about to have a heart attack. I remember the worst instance of that. We nearly got relegated. This could be any year, the last decade. It was when, can you remember Gutierrez scored on the last day of the season against, was it West Ham? He'd just come back he'd been...
Oh, yeah, the cancer stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
That was incredible.
I honestly thought I was going to die of high blood pressure or something. I was so stressed. I was like, I had to stay at the bar for about 2 hours after I just kept drinking water to get my breath back, just over a possible relegation. I mean, what's the worst that's going to happen? But yeah, I think I've inherited that from the Reed clan over the years, getting just too worked up by it. I think I'm a little bit more mellow now, but who knows? Maybe the Saudi investment will reinvigorate me. I'll start getting excited again.
Yeah, no, I've definitely had moments of that as well. Not necessarily with relegation, of course, but like a penalty shootouts. I hate watching penalty shootouts, whether it's England or Man United or whoever it is.
We haven't talked about that yet, have we? Penalty shootout memories. My goodness.
Yeah.
Well, if you're an England fan, they're mostly bad. But actually, it's going to be a nice segue. So I've got quite a few rather than just having one, because I don't really have a one single favourite moment, like the 99 Champions League final. I'm not even going to talk about that. It's an obvious one. But one of mine, actually, very recent, was that penalty shootout against Colombia.
Copy me, Andy.
It was just, honestly, it was just such relief. Like I said, so my close mates that I went to college with, we see each other quite often, but one of my mates' brother and his group of mates are a year older than us. I used to play football with some of them, but I don't see them that often, but every 2 years, without fail, I meet up with them. We all do, and we watch England. And when Pickford made that save, and then Dyer scored, and to be honest, when Dyer stepped up, I was like, right, we have to go to another penalty now. There's no way he's going to score. And he scuffed it, kind of, and it just went inside. The relief of being able to, like, all those games we watched over the years, and all that kind of heartache of England going out. And obviously, this was just the first knockout stage. It's not like it was the final or anything. And it is recent, but that is definitely one of my favourite moments.
I'm getting goosebumps just you describing it to me, Andy. Honestly, I thought I was going to sound like an idiot by coming out and being like, forget Reading. I mean, obviously I don't, but like all these different things. My comfortable top number one football memory of all time is the exact same thing. And it's weird, isn't it? Because we've just said that I know what you mean, Neil. You feel, generally speaking, that as adults, we've kind of mellowed a bit from the excitement we used to feel as kids. But that penalty shootout made me feel like 12 years old again, because as you said, all of those events, the build-up of all the defeats over years and years and years. And the thing, so in my family, my dad is like the hopeless like guy who's always hopelessly optimistic, and my mum was the kind of the pessimistic one. So every shootout, it was like my dad was convinced we were going to win. Like I don't care how many times we've lost on this particular on penalties, we're going to win it this time. And my mum, before we'd even kicked a ball, would be like, "No, we're going to lose, So then it became this clash even in the house about who's going to be right, mum or dad. And then every time, even though my mum knows nothing about football, my mum was right, and my mum was right, and my mum was right, and my dad was wrong. All of these things building up over years and years and years, all these different elements. So then we finally win one. I actually wasn't with my mum when this happened, but it was kind of like, yes, mum, like we finally done it. And to be honest, like my lasting memory of that entire thing, it almost felt like an out of body experience. It was so strange. I mean, I was watching it with a load of people I play football with on a sort of weekly basis here in Plymouth. It's probably about 15 to 20 of us in the lounge, which is obviously like, doesn't sound a lot, but stick them all in one lounge and it's massive. The windows were open. Everyone else in the street was watching it as well. And when Pickford made that save, I leapt so high off the sofa that, as I said, my lasting memory of that whole thing is as if I watched it from above the room, because the key moments, my eye level was above the TV because of just how excited I was. It was just incredible, absolutely incredible. And yeah, I mean, I'd love to see it again. I think we can do it again. Like if we end up on penalties again, now that we've actually won a penalty shootout, I do actually quite like the mental strength of this squad. So who knows? Maybe we'll get another one, but none of them will be as sweet as that one, just because of all those years of hurt. And finally, my dad was right after however many years. We won a penalty shootout.
Yeah, I do think like mentally that would be a huge boost. We'll have to wait and see that. Obviously, without going into that specific run too much, like we did get a bit lucky. Not that I care in the slightest with the run we had. And to be fair, that Trippier free kick was also another great moment. To think that the World Cup final was possible and then to have it ripped away after Kane didn't square the ball.
Kane didn't square it.
Gutting. I'll just do a couple more before we come on to you guys as well, because like I said, I've not just got one. There's a few without like going through too many obvious ones. I think I actually it's probably more like 4 years ago now. This wasn't like a major game, but I went to watch a friendly in the Aviva Stadium in Dublin, and it was Barcelona versus Celtic. This is back when Neymar was there, so it was Neymar, Suarez, Messi front three, and we didn't know who was going to play. And before we got there, we realised that I think it was like he was playing with Brazil or something. I can't remember what competition it was, but he couldn't make it. But no one knew if Messi was there, weirdly. And I just remember him coming up on the screen. Like they went through the whole squad, even Suarez, and there was like a few claps. And then the roar around the stadium when Messi was on the screen was just like, and obviously he's the most, one of the most well-known footballers ever, especially at that time. So you kind of knew he was going to get a bigger cheer, but like it was really cool to see the stadium do that. And then to see him play, even though it was a friendly, like to see him play, I've never seen him play outside of that, was just so good. It was such a cool memory. I don't think he scored though. But, I mean, he still played really well. I watched some clips before this as well, just to remind myself. So, yeah, seeing Messi was really cool. And, like, outside of Man United, I think there's some moments where at the time I maybe didn't appreciate them, but I definitely do now. So, like, the Aguero goal on the last day of the season, as annoying as that was, I think now I can appreciate that was a huge, huge, huge moment. And, like, as he said on commentary, we probably won't see anything like that. To score in the 93rd minute to win the league was pretty ridiculous.
So long since the league has come down to the last day. I can only think of maybe 4 or 5 instances in sort of a 20-year period where that's happened. And it is the most dramatic, of course, but it is a long, long time since we've had that experience. And who knows when it will sort of happen again, because they get wrapped up quite quick. Well, not this season, but you know what I mean?
But I was saying this actually on a stream once this season, like, Liverpool fans don't care, and they shouldn't care because they've not won it, or they've never won the Premier League, and they've not won the league for a long time. But even before all this happened, it's the most anticlimactic league win I can remember, and like the joy for Man City fans. It's similar, obviously. They're still going to win the league. It's still going to be great, but the difference in winning in the last minute is so good when you're the fan of that team. Obviously, when you lose, it's a whole different story. But for Man City fans, that must be absolutely insane if you're watching, especially if you were there on the day, 93rd minute, Aguero of all people as well. So yeah, it wasn't my favourite moment at the time. I'm not sure favourite moment is probably the right word, but definitely memorable. And I can appreciate it in the kind of grander scheme. What about you, Neil? Is there any particular kind of favourite moments?
I think outside of my little bubble, I think that would be up there, the Aguero goal, because that was goosebump time. That was. I remember watching that. It was really special. I think I've clashed with David on this before, where I've said that I'd rather take a Newcastle League Cup victory over England winning the World Cup.
Oh, I don't know about that. Like, see, for me, it's a bit different because Man United have won so many times, but I would take the World Cup win every time.
Oh, yeah.
I'm not sure what it is. I think partly, Andy said there's probably true that Man United have won stuff, whereas Newcastle haven't. The best we've got is a couple of championship trophies and an Intertoto Cup in my lifetime. So I'd love to see them win something. And I think part of it possibly is, I like knowledge just myself, is the sort of chip on the shoulder that Northerners have about England. I think there's a little bit of that. I think people see it as sort of London United. And I think there's a little bit of unease about, I don't want to get too sort of dark here, but about some of the fan base that follow England around the world. And I find it a little bit nauseating supporting England.
Well, I can get behind some of the supporters. Like, you got the ones that just go and like kind of, and this is a small minority. Like, I don't think
every club. Newcastle's got people like that as well, so I don't. It's hypocritical.
It's also the band. The band does my head in. Oh my god! I'd rather, if I could mute this crowd when the band's there and just listen to the commentary, I would definitely do that. So I can see why people. Oh god, it's so frustrating. I don't know many people that do like it, but I mean, they go to every game, so fair play.
There's a charm. I mean, I don't dislike it, but I wouldn't say I'd love it. But there's a charm to it. It's not an England game unless they're pumping out Great Escape, So it's all part of it. So I can understand why it would annoy some people.
Yeah, it does my head in. Any other moments for you, Neil?
Yeah, I mean, probably very, very typically all of my moments are going to be surrounded around Newcastle. Instead of the sort of nationalism, I've got the localism going on in my head. Yeah, some of them are really obvious. So we'll remember the 5-0 game in '96 when we beat Man United.
The lob.
Because because we haven't won anything, you live for these individual moments even more when you're a Newcastle fan. So all my memories are of one-off games rather than seasons. Chioti's equaliser, of course, against Arsenal.
Oh, that was good.
Yeah, I mean that could go into favourite goals of all time as well, because that was an absolute rocket. I think I've mentioned Gutierrez's goal already. Couple of wins over the local rivals as well. I remember being in the Stadium of Light, sat in the Stadium of Light in the Sunderland end, incognito, sitting on my hands as we won 4-1 at the Stadium of Light. So Shearer's last ever competitive game, because he got injured midway through the second half. He scored a penalty in that, and I remember having to bite my teeth. We scored 4 times and not react and pretend to look miserable until I was out of the Sunderland postcode. So that'll be up there. But I think topping the lot for me, and I've got a CFAX mocking up of this on my office walls somewhere, is the game we won 3-2 against Feyenoord. I don't know if anybody will remember this. It was in the Champions League, turn of the early noughties. We'd lost our first 3 games in the Champions League group. We won the next 2, and we needed to win the last one to qualify. And we went 2-0 up with Bellamy and Hugo Viana. They pegged us back to 2-2, sorry. And then the very last minute, Bellamy knocked in a rebound from, I think, Kieran Dyer shot, and I went absolutely ballistic. It was just pure. I still get goosebumps thinking of it now. Nearly 20 years ago, and it ultimately came to nothing. We got knocked out in the next round, but it was just that one-off moment. I was down a pub as well. I might have been. Was I underage at the time? Possibly. 17,
Not that
18.
you
I was
would
on the cusp.
condone that, of course.
I was on the cusp anyway. But I remember being there with a friend of mine, and just beers got knocked everywhere. Tables were upturned. People were jumping over on top of each other because I couldn't get a ticket for the match. It was just a magical moment. And as I said there, you live for individual 90 minutes experiences when you're a Newcastle fan, because we've got no silverware to show for any of it. But yeah, they're special all the same, I think.
Yeah, I do. I kind of vaguely remember that 5-0 win. All I remember, and it's probably from clips, is the lob over Schmeichel. Was it Philippe Albert, I think? Yeah,
that's right. Yep.
Yeah, that was a great goal. What is, coming on to that then, what is the kind of best goal you've watched live? Doesn't necessarily have to be at ground, because I'll be completely honest, I've not been to enough grounds to actually watch football, especially now I'm living in Ireland. It's even more kind of effort and cost to get over. But what's the best goal, David, you think you've ever seen live, either watching it on TV or at a ground?
I mean, I'm gonna kind of answer this with a couple. I think we're all doing that. We can cheat our way.
We're cheating, yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I mean, it's really difficult to pick. I mean, because I've seen so many, especially now. I watch more football now as an adult than I probably ever did as a kid. I think best goal, if we're sort of technically speaking, that I saw when watching a game, I think I have to go for Rooney against Man City. The bicycle kick, because it was just so outrageous. I mean, there's a lot of goals that you kind of you feel like you'd know how to score that. I'm not saying I could do it. For example, when someone bangs a goal in from 30 yards, I'm not saying I'm capable of that. Although I've scored from range on a 5-a-side pitch, don't know if that counts. But I at least know where to start with. Kick ball at goal, right? With the Rooney goal, where's he got that from? Where is he? At what point has he gone, right? Okay, this is what I'm going to do. This is how I'm going to execute it. I'm going to do it all in a flick of a switch and get it in the top corner. So in terms of a television game, I've just never seen anything that blows my mind quite as much as that goal did. In terms of ones I've seen in a stadium, I'm going to go more recent, really, because I saw so much of Plymouth Argyle when I was covering them for the Herald that I saw some fantastic goals. Most people won't have heard of a guy called Graham Carey, who, if you followed any Scottish football, you'll have heard of him. If you followed any League One or League Two over the last 5 years, you'll have heard of him as well. I mean, I got to be honest, he was like a football league Messi. He was just ridiculous. He assisted goals. He had unbelievable skill, could score from anywhere. And the amount of times I've seen him score just some outrageous lobs from really far out for Argyle. I can think of 2 or 3, once against Yeovil about 3 years ago, one against Morecambe, I think, as well. Just an incredible player. And the type of player that makes you realise there's so much talent outside of the Premier League. And it was at a time when I was really experiencing that at League Two. I'd never really watched as low down as League Two, but such good quality there. So if you ever get a chance to watch any Graham Carey best goals, even if you've never heard of him, check that out on YouTube. There's some good ones out there. But then I'm going to mention another one. Again, I'll have to probably fill in loads of context on this one because people just probably have no clue. But Plymouth Argyle in the last 5 or 6 years, they've had like a massive rivalry with Portsmouth. And a lot of people don't really understand it. It has a lot of historical significance because the kind of the Navy bases there have always been rivals in sort of maritime history. So then obviously it's kind of connected to the clubs as well whenever they've played each other. Portsmouth fans believe it's not a rivalry. Argyle fans believe it is, but that's because they don't have anyone that close other than Exeter to hate. But in the last 5 or 6 years, they've been the two fallen giants, the two clubs that had been in a sort of championship level maybe 15 years ago. Massive cities as well, so massive followings, but then administration problems down the bottom. So they were the two big clubs, the two clubs with the big targets on their backs everywhere else. And yeah, they met quite a lot I think it's about 3 or 4 years ago now. It was just an incredible goal from this guy called Jamil Matt, who again, none of you will have heard of, but check it out if you can, where it was away at Portsmouth. It was in the playoffs. And it was kind of similar to Rooney's goal, but a lot closer to the goal where the ball came in from a corner. He chested it down and did a bicycle kick from sort of a really tight angle. It wasn't like front to goal. It was kind of a really, really tight angle. Chested it down, managed to flick it over his head, get it in the top corner. And I'm pretty sure they drew the game and they ended up going up anyway. But it was a rivalry game, incredible piece of skill. That for me, the bottom line of an incredible goal is I wouldn't even know where to start to try and do that. And yeah, again, Football League player, there's exceptional technique talent down there. So yeah, that stuck with me.
You are correct in saying I have never heard of any of those players, but YouTube is YouTube is a brilliant tool, and I'm sure there is plenty of clips. So again, a bit like Ryan Giggs' Secret and Skills, we can all go and check them out once we've finished listening to this podcast. How about you, Neil? Any particular goals that stand out that you saw at the stadium or saw live on TV?
Yeah, you can probably guess where these are going to come from as well, straight from players in black and white shirts. So yeah, the obvious ones are duty against Arsenal, as I mentioned. Ben Arthur scored a couple of really good solo goals. I don't know if you remember towards the beginning of the last decade under Pardew when he ran through Bolton against Bolton and Blackburn, ran through 4 or 5 players from his own half. CCS scored that one against Chelsea in the same season. There's Shearer's against Everton.
The volley.
Remember that one? The volley,
The one over the shoulder, right? Just rocketed it in.
Amiobi headed it back to him, I think, and he had it on the volley from about 30 yards out. That sticks in the mind. There's, I think, best goal I've seen live. The one that sticks out weirdly, and I've probably seen better goals than this. When I was living down in London, I went to see Newcastle play at Spurs, White Hart Lane, and Martin scored one. If you look this up on YouTube, he won 3-2 that day. And he scored. It was the hardest shot I've ever seen anybody hit, either in real life or on the telly. It was an absolute rocket. And I think that was, we did win that one 3-2. I went to White Hart Lane a few times and saw us get beat quite a few times, but that sticks in the mind. These are all sort of thunderbolts. I think there's the sort of two sets of people who think team goals are the best, which I think is probably right because
I'm not necessarily.
Thunderbolt. I'm with Thunderbolts. Let's go Thunderbolts.
Because there's so much that can go wrong in a team goal. There's so many intricate moves that needs to be exactly right. And then with a 35-yard howitzer, it's basically just hitting hoop. But those are my favourite goals.
And if they hit the woodwork as well,
Tony Yeboah in mid-90s. I think if I'm going to step outside the Newcastle bubble for just a second, the one that really I'm fond of seeing, and again, there are probably better goals in this, but can you remember Michael Essien's goal against Arsenal in, was it 2006?
Oh, the curve, wasn't it?
The curling,
yeah. It's the camera was right behind him in one of the angles, and the ball comes out to him, and he sort of hits it with the outside of his foot, and it starts a bit like Roberto Carlos.
Yeah, I was going to say like Carlos.
Yeah, against France, it starts so far outside the post and then bends back in. I don't know why, but I love goals like that. So I think that's probably outside of Newcastle. That's one of my favourite goals. That if I had longer to think about it, I'm sure I'll come up with a list of similar ones. I think Mendieta scored once for Spain in a major tournament, which was similar. But yeah, I think that Essien goal is is pretty special. I think that's underrated, that one. I don't think it really gets as much praise as it should. But
I think I rewatched it the other day because we've been looking at because we're doing the World Cup on Scout, and so I've been watching sort of like Lampard highlights, and I think Lampard was somehow involved in that goal. I've recently rewatched that Essien goal, and just remember it's not so much when he's hit the ball obviously the way he's hit the ball is obviously what's achieved it, but it's when you go behind the ball and you see it's going wide and then it bend. You don't see that very often. It's I suppose it's not a freak of nature. It's laws of physics obeying themselves in ways we never thought imaginable, and it's awesome.
Didn't I don't know his name, but I'm almost certain in the last couple of years a Southampton defender did something very similar. And I only remember it because of FPL, and I don't think many people had him. I can't remember his name now.
Was it Valerie, perhaps?
Valerie, I think was it Valerie? Yeah.
He was like on the right side. It wasn't quite the same because he wasn't because I think Essien was quite central, but he was on the right hand side. I'm sure it did the same thing, out and then back in. I could be wrong. I could be remembering that wrong. I didn't check it because I didn't really think about Essien before.
I can think of plenty of players whose shots were on target and then went off target because my team.
Yeah, that Essien goal was pretty nice. Like for me, I've probably reminded of this because I saw a clip of it recently. Was the Van Persie volley against Villa? Like the technique to do that, to catch the ball out of the air. Like the pass from Rooney was really good as well. And I know it was offside, so a lot of people wouldn't count it because he was. It should have been given offside. But that was great. One of my favourite goals ever was when Lampard equalised against Germany in 2002. The problem was. There's no goal line technology back there, so it never counted. But in my head, that was 2-2, and we go on to win that game.
I was so angry. We would have, I agree with you. We would have won that game because we'd have come from behind. You nailed off that. If you come from a 2-goal lead down, and you level the game in 2 minutes, you've got the momentum and you've got the players to go and win the game. So you're not crazy, Andy. I'm fully with you. We'd have won that.
Well, I mean, we did get absolutely destroyed in the second half, but you're right. I think
morale-wise,
of course we got destroyed. Exactly. Otherwise, like goals I can remember, for England, definitely. I mean, there's lots from the 90s, like the Owen one against Argentina really sticks out, and Beckham versus Greece just for the moment. Like to be able to step up and hit a free kick that far out in the last minute of the game was incredible. But I think Gascoigne's against Scotland was probably the one that stands out for me. The technique to get it up and over. Was it Colin Hendry did it against? Yeah. So that was a great one. And then for Man United, probably a bit more recently, you got Ronaldo. I think it was against Porto in the Champions League. And again, it was just a belter of a shot from, I don't even know how far it was, but I'm pretty sure it was quite a bit further than just outside the box. And he just belted it straight in the middle of the goal. Just keeper couldn't get anywhere near it. And then for Rooney, obviously the Man City one was great. But the other one that kind of sticks out in my mind, just because of what happened before, was actually against Newcastle. It was the volley where he caught it from outside the box. Because before that, he's arguing with the ref. Because Rooney, he's mouthy. He'd always argue with the ref and stuff. And just to turn around and just have the technique to just pull that out of the air. I mean, I could go on for ages. Like there's one or two where Beckham took a corner and just passed it straight to Scholes, and Scholes took the volley straight out of the air. Like I'm with you. Like team goals are great. I remember like the Arsenal one against Norwich. Yeah. I mean that was a great goal, tiki taka, etc. But a belter from outside the box, top corner, will do it for me every single day. Like, like a team goal is obviously great because you got a lot of people involved. But like Scholes catching the ball out from a corner and nailing it into the top corner. I mean, it's hard
as well.
Yeah, it's hard to do that. Like, it's not obviously that's why they're paid so much money, but it's not like if I went out and tried to do that, the amount of attempts it would take me, and I'm sure he would have loads of attempts and miss them as well. But yeah, those are kind of my favorite goals, and kind of you guys have. You've already kind of mentioned it a few times, Neil especially. Do you think your love for football has changed as you've gotten older? And do you think the way in which you watch football is different? And I kind of mentioned that earlier, as in, I didn't care that if there was a Kante of the 90s, I don't really care what they were doing. I was watching more for the goals and the flair and stuff. Do you think kind of the way you viewed football and your love for it has changed?
Yeah, I think the jobs changes it as well to some extent. I do wonder how much FPL is sort of keeping my interest in football to some extent, because I tend not to watch. I don't watch, for example, like La Liga or the Bundesliga, or don't watch many championship games. I tend to keep an eye on it as much as I can because obviously we're going to get promoted teams next year. But I think the way clubs do, and I think there's a certain apathy around Newcastle at the moment about their own club. I think that sort of filters into your bloodstream after a while, and you become a bit immune to it. I think you're a bit like David was saying before about all those painful memories over the years, you build up a tolerance to them after a while, so you're kind of a bit dulled. The senses are a bit dulled after a while, so you maybe don't experience the dizzying highs and terrifying lows you did when you were a kid. But FPL's changed it massively. I mean, I've been playing it for best part of 20 years, really, and then working in it for 2 years with Scout, and then a year before that with another company. So, yeah, I mean, it's very rarely I watch a game as a neutral now. Certainly in the top flight, because there's always some vested interest. Even if it's not my player playing, I want somebody else's assets to do badly. So yeah, it's changed my perception of Premier League football. And well, last season, me and my dad, it was the last game of the Championship season, and me and my dad went to see Sheffield Wednesday, managed by Steve Bruce at the time, funnily enough, play QPR, because he'd always wanted to go to Hillsborough. And I remember really enjoying it because there was nothing riding on it for me in terms of either partisan bias or FPL points. And I just watched the game unfold. I just watched the players playing. I sort of watched them tactically, and I really enjoyed it. So obviously the love is still there, but it's kind of dwarfed to some extent by FPL involvement. But yeah, I think it's a part aging process, and then part just realism and putting things in perspective. Things get put into context as you get older, and sort of family and things like that. So I still love it. Obviously, it's still my job, and I don't want to be ever take for granted that I'm working in the industry. But it sadly it probably doesn't mean as much as it did when you're sort of 15, as when you're hurtling towards 40 as I am.
I'm kind of the same, really. Like, I still love it as well. I mean, FPL has definitely altered the way I view it. Like, if I've got a player in that match, then I'm watching that player to see where they're positioned. Like, especially if it's a striker, I'm looking, are they out the box? Are they all the way forward? Are they the target man they're actually playing the wingers in, etc., etc.? So I do sometimes wish I could go back and watch football now without FPL in the back of my mind. So there's that. And I don't think, like, when I watch a game, I know that the love hasn't changed. Like, I still celebrate the goals. I still love watching football, but I definitely I just can't watch as much football anymore. Like you said, family comes into it. Like, you work all day, and then there's stuff to do in the evenings. You know, if the kid's been at school all day, it's the only chance you're getting to see them. So, like, I rarely get to watch Champions League games. Like, for example, I really struggle to get time to watch them. To be fair, I still get to watch quite a bit of Premier League, and obviously I do that for FPL as well. But you know, on the weekend I might watch 2 or 3 plus games and then catch up on the highlights. So I still watch that, but outside of that and outside of internationals, I do find it tough. Not out of a. In fact, I actually get pretty frustrated that I can't watch more Champions League because I'm missing out on so many good players. And like, you can watch the highlights and stuff, but it's not always the same. So like, I definitely haven't watched enough of Ronaldo and Messi in recent years, and I probably will regret that in a few years when they're not playing anymore. It's just a time thing. I don't know about you, David, if you're in the same situation like for that.
Yeah, I to be honest, I mean, it's only in the last few years I've got back into the Champions League. I went a long run, not really being interested in it. I think that kind of coincided with English clubs not doing that well in it. I think it's only really in the last 2 or 3, 4 years that English clubs have started to become what they once were in the tournament, because they were fantastic when I was sort of first coming into it, and then obviously, it kind of took a dip. So I know exactly what you mean. If it's so, I've been working in football since 2014 as loosely as a journalist. I still kind of consider myself one now, not a proper one, but I still do a lot of similar things. And once I got into working in it, it's a case of you got to pick and choose what you're going to watch, because for all of those reasons you said there, it's like if you're working weekends, which I've been working weekends for like 6 years now, so I'm used to it now. But there are times when like the wife is still sort of a bit like, oh, it's a bit of a shame, So I still get to watch the football. It's just that when it's not on the weekends, if it's in the week, it's really hard to kind of to justify it.
Yeah.
But I mean, I certainly football has changed me. Working in this has changed my own view as well. I feel less affiliated to Reading than I did before, because I just haven't had the time to watch them, because I haven't lived in Reading since I left for uni in like 2011. I've lived elsewhere in loads of different other places, so I can't go there as often. Watching their games is harder to do on television because they're not on television as often. So I almost feel now like a bit of a mercenary when it comes to football, because I've kind of had to, I always wanted to work in football. So I had to make a lot of choices in the early days about what I was prepared to do it. And if anyone's ever interested in working in this industry, you do just have to kind of let some allegiances slip sometimes. So for example, you've got to be prepared to go anywhere in the country to work for any newspaper or media organization to do this job. So the first place I went to was Swansea. So I loosely covered Swansea City for about 18 months right at the beginning. I mean, that was great because they were in the Premier League at the time under Brendan Rodgers, but obviously they weren't Reading. So I had to but when you cover a team, something that people don't really necessarily understand is you can cover a team, not be a supporter of that team and still be invested in that team and want them to do well. So then I worked at the Plymouth Herald for 3 or 4 years, and I got really invested in Plymouth Argyle. But in terms of the emotion of it, it is different because you can enjoy the highs as much as everybody else is going to, because you're in the stadium. Even if you're in the press box, most of these clubs, it's still close enough, and you talk to fans often enough because you're at the game and you talk to them before and after and what have you. So you can still enjoy those great moments. But when they lose the playoff final, or they get relegated or what have you, like, it stings, but you still have an immunity to it, because at the end of the day, it's like, well, I'm not actually a Plymouth Argyle fan, I'm not actually a Swansea City fan. And there's loads of journalists across like all of the media organizations who will cover a team regularly, but they don't support them. So my colleague at the Herald was a Crystal Palace fan, but he's still really vested in Plymouth Argyle, but he can take those low points better than the real fans can. So then it does mean that I'm so disconnected from the emotion in football, or had been for some time. And then FBL's kind of tweak that again. But again, I feel like a mercenary, because rather than having a vested interest in any Premier League team, I happily watch Wolves get beaten 9-6 if Jimenez scores 6 goals. So the emotion then becomes more about myself than any team in the games that I'm watching. So it does mean that if I can ever get to a game where there is no FPL involvement, I will go if I have the time, and I'll probably enjoy it more. So, I mean, I think the most recent one I was actually able to physically be at was when Argyle played Reading in the League Cup, I think in September this last year. It was incredible, quite literally luck of the draw, that my daughter's first football game was when my local team played my home team. And there was like nothing really riding on it because it was a League Cup game. I literally didn't care who won. I just wanted to see a good game. I wanted it to be an enjoyable experience for my little girl. And it was, I think it was 4-2, 4-3, went to extra time. We got to see everything. So I kind of enjoyed that a lot more than I would necessarily enjoy watching a Premier League game, because it is work. And I never want to act like that's like a curse or anything. It's just comes with the job. I still enjoy watching the games, but at the end of the day, I'm not going to get too hung up on the results of it. I've become quite well practiced, and if I've had a Saturday afternoon where I've been working and my team's done badly, I just 5 o'clock. Well, actually, no, it would be about 7 o'clock when the 5:30 game's over. Just shut it off. That's done now. So even the game FPL is something that I have to emotionally kind of control. And at the end of the day, just put it in a box, put it on the shelf, and go spend some time with the family. And I'm sure that sounds really strange to a lot of people, because football really is about enjoying it. And there'll be people who don't do this for a job, who will allow FPL to dictate their mood in a way that a hobby would. For me, it's less of a hobby now than it is a job, which doesn't mean I don't enjoy it, because you can enjoy your job, but it is a very, very different frame of mind now than it was maybe 3, 4, 5 years ago.
Yeah, and I do think that's important, being able to switch off from FPL. I do think, without going into too much detail, like, people do struggle to do that, and it does change me from time to time. I am better at it now, though. Like, I do just kind of switch off. Look, sometimes you make the right call and it goes wrong. Sometimes you make the wrong call and it goes right. And you got to realize, like, luck is part of it. One thing I will say, like, now I'm older, one thing that's probably better about watching football now, I kind of already touched on it, is you appreciate things you never would when you were younger. So I remember when Ronaldo first came to Man United, I couldn't stand the step overs. When I first started watching Beckham, I thought all he does is cross the ball. Like, why is he in this team? And then when he started playing for England, especially like around the time when he got made captain, you just appreciated him for much more. And I was a bit older at that point. Like, I can picture me now, and I love people that do the mock-ups of what Twitter would have been like back in the early 90s and stuff. But I can imagine now, if I was watching football now, but I was a kid, I think Trent Alexander-Arnold, he can't defend. I would not appreciate the amount he creates in that Liverpool team. And the system is built around the fullbacks creating chances. And they're not... Yes, they're there to defend, of course, but it's not in the same way as maybe other teams use fullbacks and stuff like that. Like Firmino, I mean, you could have a whole discussion about whether he should score more goals. But ultimately now, I know there's a system built around him where that's not his only job. Whereas back in the day, I would just rate him as an awful player. So I think now you can kind of appreciate players more, and I can appreciate football more now I'm older. So that's a good thing. Even if I get to watch less, I guess I'm not writing players off for basically not being rubbish, just not doing the job that I want them to do, which is basically everyone running forward and scoring goals when you're a kid. And that's probably a good place to wrap this one up, I would say. I've really enjoyed talking and reminiscing about football gone past. Obviously, no FPL, or a little bit of FPL, but not a huge amount. But it was fun to kind of relive. And I've actually, for anyone that's watching, hopefully you didn't see it too much, we did a little bit of a pause there and came back to it. And I've just been reminded on Twitter about Trevor Sinclair's overhead kick, which was also an amazing goal. So and to be honest, I'm sure once we actually wrap up this podcast, there'll be 100 odd goals that we've forgotten, not talked about. Let us know in the comments below if you're watching on YouTube what your favourite goal is and favourite moments. But otherwise, thanks very much, gentlemen, for joining me.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. As you said, it's been good to reminisce on old times, on simpler times when football didn't involve us tearing our hair out about our own FPL team. And my last word is go and YouTube Graham Carey. Oh, he's the Football League Messi. Please go and check him out.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Yep, see everybody soon.
Yeah, thanks for watching. If you did enjoy it and you watch it on YouTube, make sure to like the video, subscribe if you are new around here. We'll have plenty more content. There's Football Manager coming tomorrow. We've already got Championship Manager, FPL, and Scoutcast as well that you can go and listen to that's already been recorded. Otherwise, we will catch you next time. Cheers all.